Hey y'all, I'm Carolina Tony. Today the road brings me to Columbia, South Carolina, and I am standing in front of the Robert Mills house. Robert Mills was America's first trained architect. If you haven't heard of Robert Mills, surely you've seen some of his work. A lot of the buildings and structures all across the United States was designed by Robert Mills. Robert Mills was America's first trained architect, and we're going to learn a little bit about him right after the station identification. So this is called the Robert Mills house, was designed by Robert Mills. However, Robert Mills never lived here. He designed it and had it built for Ainsley Hall, who they think Mills actually owed money to for debt. At the time, Robert Mills was in the process of bankruptcy, and there's never any record of him even paying Ainsley Hall.
She's waiting for love to be realized. I'll send her my heart covered as a gift, and hope that you'll take it into her side.
They have reconstructed the carriage house, but back in 1886, the Winthrop College was founded in the seminary's chapel that stood right there. Once sat a building. That building, in fact. This building was photographed in 1930. In 1936, it was dismantled and moved to Winthrop College in Rock Hill.
Right, so Ainsley came here with his brother. He had a very successful shop on what is now called Main Street, which is the street coming right off of our State House, but was then called Richardson Street. And he sold home goods, and he sold food, and he sold different types of wear. You see the symmetry with the columns, right? You'll note the columns up here are ionic, right? Notating the level of formality, notating it to the front. You see the recessed basement. And you also see some decorative elements like that fan light up front. That's not necessarily typical in all of Robert Mills' work, but in his later work it was. So this is a statement where he's starting to get more and more decorative, right? And when you see on neoclassical buildings shapes like this circular shape up here and the circles in the windows, what that is supposed to indicate is that you're going to see circles inside the house as well. You're going to see those spherical shapes. One decorative element that most people I don't think would notice is, do you see how uniform all the mortar is in the bricks? Yeah. I think a lot of people think that's due to age. It's actually not. That house was red washed originally, which means that after they put in all the brick, it is structurally brick, and they mortared it, they then painted the whole thing red, and they came in and they hand stenciled in the lines for all the mortar work in white. Right? And a tremendous amount of detail, a tremendous amount of craftsmanship. Now, we know that Robert Mills was the architect and oversaw the construction of this house, but we are certain, although we don't know the people's names, that it was constructed by enslaved individuals. So all of the craftsmanship you see in this house was done by enslaved individuals. We have one piece that was owned by Cheraw, but that was not something she had here because she never lived here. Everything else is appropriate to the era, roughly the 1820s through the 1860s. Curved plaster wall, incredible detail, right? Of course, all hand done. Even the door frames are curved. It adds about 4 feet of space to this hallway, and it gives a real sense of grandeur. The fireproof building in Charleston was constructed by Robert Mills. As you can imagine, house fires at this time were a tremendous danger, right? So there was it's actually behind a double bricked wall. So this wall has 2 sets of bricks. And the idea is that the stairwell itself, so stairwells spread fire really quickly. So as you can imagine, one, not only are drafts created through the air being sucked up, the hot air being sucked up, but also because the surface is horizontal and then vertical, it essentially preheats the surface of front. Is why did both the Halls and the Hampton Prestons across the street really want to live in this neighborhood? So I mentioned outside that this was the suburbs of Columbia. These homes are built in a plantation home style, but they're not plantation homes themselves. There never would have been any agriculture here. Things would not have been produced on this property. These were essentially a social place where people typically would come in the winter. These are places of entertainment. So when you look at these houses, a lot of these houses are built in a way that it would be really, really convenient to entertain people, and maybe not so convenient to live in, right? And that's true of plantation houses as well, but you can really point it out here. This house in particular has some strange room choices. So this room was intended to be a dining room, but it's a strange choice for a dining room. So it would have been atypical for people to have multiple sets of glasses. So in between courses, people would have come and they would have put cold ice water into this, or cold water, into this wine rinser, and they would have picked up their glass and they would have dumped it and rinsed it and then set it here to have it rinsed out and cool for the next course. Okay, so this is one of the 2 parlors. This house was designed to have 2 parlors, and it actually has 2 exactly symmetrical doors opening to the outside. So this room and that room are mirror images of each other. In a lot of houses this age, people tend to think of them as women's and men's parlors. We don't necessarily think that was the intent here. We think that this room would have been used for music or dancing, and the other room could have been used for card games, socializing, that type of thing. Right? You'll notice that all of the furniture is either very light and movable or it is on wheels. That's because you're using this as a place for entertaining. Robert Mills, as I mentioned, architect, America's first architect, America's first trained architect. He trained with Benjamin Latrobe, Thomas Jefferson, Charles Bulfinch, and others. And he was from Charleston originally. He ended up moving up to the Boston, Pittsburgh area, where he spent the first few years of his career. And by 18 or so, he had done about 25 projects in 3 different states, in the United States, and he built public buildings. He built the Library of Congress, he built the Smithsonian, what was then the Mint and is now the Smithsonian Museum of American Art, and hundreds of other projects. In fact, by the time of his death, he had built almost 130 buildings in the United States.
Now, the Robert Mills House in Columbia is called the Robert Mills House because he designed it. There's no record of him ever being paid for it. So they are thinking that he designed it for Ainsley Hall, which was a merchant in downtown Columbia. They think perhaps Robert Mills was working off a debt that he owed Ainsley because Robert Mills was in the process of declaring bankruptcy at the time. Check out the detail of this stairwell. It's notched out for the sole purpose of the chain coming down so the light can hang in the center of the room. Now we're descending to the basement.
Okay. So one of the things I always get comments about is the smell down here. You smell that Crayola smell? Yeah. That's actually the bricks. The reason we know it's the bricks for sure is that when this house was originally acquired by Historic Columbia, it was actually in the process of being demolished. So some of the bricks had already been taken out. So we looked at the original construction records from that court battle that we talked about outside, and we found the exact manufacturer in Virginia that made the bricks. We found that they made the exact same bricks today. We ordered a bunch of bricks and we replaced the bricks with the original. That's also what we used to construct each of the carriage houses on dining room. If the family was not entertaining, this is where they would have been. And you can see that most of the china here is made in the United States. And there was the china exhibit upstairs. It's not English pottery. It's mostly made in, it was actually mostly made in Camden. This room is a pantry or a prep room. So unlike our pantries now that you can just buy all your food prepped, there would have been a lot of work to do to prepare food. And like I mentioned, they wouldn't have been producing any food on this property, right? This was a place to entertain. But they would have purchased it in places like Ainsley Hall Store. They would have had it brought in from their plantation further out. And then they would have needed to process it in different ways. So does anybody know what that big cypress husk over there in the corner is?
Flour?
Yeah, it's for flour and milling rice. Alright. So this is a warming kitchen. Like I mentioned, and you can see built to those original plans, the kitchen would have been out in that building where you bought your tickets. That flanker building over there. The kitchen would have been on the first floor. The second floor would have been used for laundry, and it also would have been the living area for any enslaved people living here. Right? So, do you know why the kitchen was kept separate from the house?
Fire.
Fire, yeah. Also, they were using wood fireplaces, right? All right. So, like I mentioned, this is a lot more ornate than you would typically expect for the back of the house, right? And you actually do see that it's a lower level column on this side of the house. So Mills is still adhering to that level of formality shift, right? The top has ionic and these are Doric, right? If you look, actually you can't see it. If there were not leaves on these trees, the State House would be about, I would say 5 blocks diagonal to us, right? So it really would be a pretty quick walk for people here. The top stories, those windows would have opened at night to get good airflow coming through. The middle stories would have been excess room for entertaining. And the bottom stories is where the dirtier tasks that needed to be done to keep the household running would have happened. So cleaning rugs, or anything that might create smoke, anything you really wouldn't want in your house where you're sitting would have been done on this back bottom area.
This is the site of the former Columbia Theological Seminary. It was founded in 1828 by the Presbyterian Synod of South Carolina and Georgia, and located here in 1831. While Robert Mills was building this house, Ainsley Hall actually lived across the street. Ironically, before the completion of the house, Ainsley Hall passed away. And several years after that, a court battle went on as to who actually owned the house. Ainsley Hall's wife ended up with the house and she sold it. So the Halls never actually lived here. As I said, Ainsley Hall had this house built around 1818, but in 1823, Wade Hampton purchased the house. Well, I hope you have enjoyed our trip to the Robert Mills house in Columbia, South Carolina. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give me a big old thumbs up. Be sure to share with your family and friends. But until next time, y'all have a good day.